This is a new way of looking at damage in the teeth.
She's co-founder of Parametrics, which is the company that has created InnerView.
It's an amazing technology that we're just excited to share with everybody.
So your product actually helps with identifying structural inadequacies, mobilities.
So there is a handpiece. By just applying gentle pressure forward, it automatically triggers the little rod to tap the tooth 4 times. Inside the rod is a sensor. It picks up how the tooth is responding to it. And that is what creates this little energy return graph, we call it.
This is like me being super excited.
The ability to pick things up before they've gotten irreversible or before they've gotten highly damaged is such an advantage to the patient and to the dentist.
We are back with another edition of Nobody Told Me That, and I'm excited because this is a clinical edition, and sometimes even I get tired of talking about RCM. So I'm excited to go back into the operatory. I have a fun guest with me. Dr. Cherilyn Sheets is here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Teresa. How are you?
I am good. When I told her, I remember I told you we were going to geek out over documentation, and you got excited. For my documentation geeks, it's not all clinical. It's going to apply to documentation. Just hang in there because this is going to be fun. I was introduced to you by Art Wiederman, who is, a numbers guy. He's a geek in a different way, right? The numbers guy. He's a CPA. And he said, you've got to hear about this new product because when he found out how much I geeked out about documentation, he's like, oh, I need to introduce you to Cherilyn. So, and I did not know about this passion project of yours and a different way of documenting. And we'll get into that in a second. But I was thinking to myself, I thought I had seen most of the documentation, the ways to document, right, to get claims paid. And so it's really rare when like a new product kind of comes at me from the side. It's not new. You've been working on it for a while, but new to me. And I'm like, wait, I can use this. Like I get 3 claims right now that I was looking at that I could have used this on. So I was excited to get the introduction. But very quickly, I just want to tell people, and then happy to have you say something too about yourself. But I was looking at your LinkedIn. And I'm like, okay, well, she's co-founder of Parametrics, which is the company that has created InnerView, which is the product we're going to talk about. It's InnerView. And people, I don't get paid for this stuff. This is like me being super excited. So just know that. But then when I looked at your LinkedIn, I'm like, you're also all this other stuff. You've gotten awards. Let me just read this. The Gordon Christensen Award for Excellence in Lecturing, which people, that is no joke. You have gotten Distinguished Dentist Awards from the Pierre Fauchard International Honor Dental Academy. And let me just say the Pierre Fauchard, and I know I'm probably saying that, or Fauchard, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
That, for most of you that are newer to dentistry, that's the Ethics and Excellence in Dentistry and Ethics Society. That's nothing to sneeze at either. So I was like super impressed by all of these. And if you go to her LinkedIn, you'll see that she's past president, American Academy of Aesthetic Dentistry, American Association of Women Dentists. I mean, it's a lot. And then you also were the founding chairman of the board of the National Children's Oral Health Foundation, which a lot of us know is America's Tooth Fairy.
Right.
And you had said earlier, like you've had all these different lives. Like this is like a cat with 9 lives, Dr. Cherilyn. What's going on here? How do you have the time to do it? And still, like you're still practicing, you said?
Yes, I'm still practicing 40 hours a week doing prosthodontic work. There's something to be said for longevity. So, I love the profession. I really find that it gives someone just so many opportunities if you're curious and you like what you do and you enjoy caring for people and you like solving problems. I mean, dentistry is a candy store, really. You can constantly reinvent yourself. And I think that that's what keeps the passion going is if you're just doing the same thing that you learned in dental school over and over and over and over, anybody would get burned out and discouraged. But if you're constantly looking at ways to better yourself, provide better care for your patients, maybe just satisfy your own personal curiosity, that's, I think, keeps you very in the game and very excited. And we joke about this in our family. The R word is never mentioned. I mean, that is just anathema. So anyway, I just never think about that. I'm just very excited about what I'm doing right now and the opportunities for the future and what I think we can bring to dentistry.
You don't mention the R word, but I fantasize about the R word because, I mean, the longevity is real, right? Like, we've both been in the industry. You've been in it obviously a
Yeah,
little bit longer and done so much more, but you're right, though, the curiosity thing and we didn't even have this on the docket to talk about, but what I tell my managers that, I'll mentor a couple, and what I'll hear from them is, "It's getting boring." I feel like my doctor's even bored, and I
mm,
always say to them, like, "When was the last time they tried something new, not just the new things that everybody feels like they should try. Because
yeah,
there's peer pressure, right, to
sure.
have the digital radiography, all that kind of thing, but
Yeah,
when you have a dentist that is curious and takes new classes all the time, I don't see that boredom. Do
that's
you
right.
find that?
No, a good friend of mine who's no longer with us, Hal Slavkin, you used to always talk about the need to be a lifelong learner, and that
Mm,
just really rang a bell with me too, because that I think is just critically important. And my dad, bless his heart, who was a dentist, when as soon as I got out of dental school, he said, "Well, you won this a continuing education course. You need to go take something." And I said, "I just got out of school. I don't want to go take anything." He goes, "No, no,
yeah,
no. You need to go take something." And so I finally begrudgingly, signed up and went back and took a class, and I thought, that was really interesting."
yeah,
And then I just became an addict, on taking everything, and I think that just broadens your knowledge, of course, but it
mhm.
also broadens your interests, and it creates more curiosity because the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know, and that's wonderful for everybody.
Yeah, yeah, and managers, if you've got or even dentists, I know a lot of younger dentists listen to this, like, if you ever go home at night and think, "Is this all there is?" Like, just restorations and people in pain, all that,
Yeah,
maybe it is time to explore something you didn't
yeah,
think you could add
sure.
into your mix, right?
Yeah, right.
And maybe it's interview, like, well, let's talk about interview here, and so I
Okay.
keep wanting to say interview, but it's not, it's InnerView. So for my billers out there, there's 2 codes that could be attributed or used with this product, and the reason why I want you all to know about the codes is because all I hear, and I'm sure you hear it, is doctors will say, "Well, I'll use it, but what code can I bill for?" Like they're not
Yes.
gonna use it unless they have a code, which is it's weird, but it is what it is, right?
Yeah.
And I have to look at my notes here because I used to know these codes inside out, but I don't anymore. D0600, which is the non-ionizing diagnostic procedure capable of quantifying, monitoring, and recording changes. Listen to me, people. Changes in the structure of enamel, dentin, and cementum, which is the tooth, right? And the tooth part. So
Yeah.
if there's any kind of movement or any kind of structural changes and you're doing a test for that, that's what you have. But then you also we now have this code 461 for testing for a cracked tooth. And the interesting part about that code is people are like, "Oh yeah, we've got this code and it's not getting covered." I don't care if it's not getting covered. If you're doing it, do it, right? Like you should absolutely be doing
Yes.
it. So your product actually helps with identifying structural inadequacies, mobilities, all that kinda thing?
Defects. Yeah, think of it
Okay.
as defects. At the end of the day, what we pick up is micro movement. And why that's so important is because for my entire career, I have worked with all of these really wonderful technologies, some very
Mhm,
sophisticated like CBCTs and all of the newer things that we have, but everything is visually based. So if you think about it, our clinical exams are visual, our x-rays are definitely visual, our CBCTs are just a little finer vision, but everything is a static picture in time
mhm,
when the teeth or the implants are not being loaded. It doesn't show you what happens, it's being used. And so that's the critical difference. And that's why we've always had such a difficult time picking up structural inadequacies. One of the famous quotes that I love to use is from Lord Kelvin, who invented the thermometer. And he said,
okay,
"You can't treat what you can't measure." And yet, that's what we do every single day in dentistry. We're treating structural breakdown in teeth
mhm,
and restorations when we don't have any way to measure it and modify it, or monitor it. So
mhm,
that's why this is such a game changer because it allows us to, in just 2 to 3 seconds per tooth site or 2 minutes for the entire mouth, we have a complete structural picture of what happens when that patient is chewing or grinding their teeth or, eating ice or whatever they do, to load it. That's amazing. It is not always aligned with what you're seeing visually. And that's, I think, the thing that was so shocking to me. We know that patients, just based on our statistics, and we have the largest database right now of damaged teeth in the world. We have over 1.6 million of these energy return graphs, and we've got hundreds of FEA models that took us 6 years to develop, that we actually have to use the same software that they use for rocket science in order to do them. They're so dense.
Wow.
Yeah, and then we've got thousands of teeth that we've actually purposely fractured and followed the fracture process so we can see how it develops. So there's
Mhm.
been a great deal of work, not only in dentistry, and this is what I find so exciting about this. This is such interdisciplinary work. It's not only dentistry, but it's material science and biology. It's engineering, all aspects of engineering and computer science. And we now have large enough database that we really are starting to be able to utilize AI and machine learning to train the computers to
Mhm.
do the more sophisticated interpretation. I can teach you easily, Teresa, how to do the basics, on what it is, the information we get and what it indicates. But
Mhm.
when you start realizing that every single one of these little energy return graphs that we get when we test a tooth is like a structural fingerprint,
Yeah.
then you start understanding that, lots of times there's many bad things that are happening to the tooth all at the same time, or an implant,
Right.
and they get superimposed and create that unique structural fingerprint. So with AI, we're able to go in and start separating out, well, this type of graph is for a loose crown, and this type of graph is for a crack. This type of
Mhm.
graph is for, a widened periodontal ligament. And then we can start putting all that together. That's in the future. But right now, what we've got is something that says a red flag and it says, we've got a problem here. This site is really vibrating a lot. And that
Mhm.
alerts me as a dentist to say, well, why is that happening? And then I want to go in and I want to look and see, does it have a crown on it? Maybe it's a loose crown. Does it have
Yeah.
a tooth that's got a crack? So there's all kinds of things that it starts directing you to look at in more detail. So you become a better diagnostician.
So you said something interesting that I think I just really hadn't thought of. You were talking about load, right? So, I was always taught that when you're talking about load, it's, the chewing forces, of course, the whatever the prosthetic you put on the tooth and how it interacts, but even just the tooth itself, chewing
Yeah,
is a force, right? And one thing I just never really put together is when you are just taking x-rays and all, there's no load being placed on that tooth. It's just
right.
sitting there, right? So there's no stress on it. I mean, you can do the tooth
No,
sleuth, but you're really
no,
relying on the patient's ability to translate pain, not
right.
necessarily the movement. Now, in the pregame, you were talking to me about inner movement, and I was like, wait, there's more than one movement? What are you talking about? And for people on YouTube, you'll see in the background, we'll have like an example of how you do this. And then I also want for the people who are listening, if you could explain, let's have you do this first. How do you, is it a wand? How do you do
Yeah.
this? Let's talk about,
Mm,
because I'm sure people driving are like, what are they talking about? Is it a pill? Is it a wand? So let's do
yeah,
that. And then
okay,
educate our listeners on the inner movement thing that I didn't even know about. So let's
okay.
go that way.
Okay, great. All right, so let's start with the basics, all right?
Okay.
So there is a handpiece. It's smaller than the typical scanner that you
Okay.
use in your mouth. And then it has a disposable tip on it that has a little tab that sits out, and you just place that onto the occlusal surface of the tooth. Internally, there's a rod that has a little sensor on it. And when you have it horizontal, so it's at the right angle, and up
Mhm.
against the tooth, so it's flush, then by just applying gentle pressure forward, it automatically triggers the little rod to tap the tooth 4 times.
Okay.
Inside the rod is a sensor which picks up not only while it's putting the force into the tooth, it picks up how the tooth is responding to it. And that is what creates this little energy return graph, we call it. So if you want to think in terms, particularly being here in California, if you have a little earthquake in the tooth, the seismograph, shows you how bad it is, right?
Yeah.
So with this, we're putting a little mini earthquake, if you want to think of it that way, into the tooth, and also sensing how the tooth is responding in real time to it.
Mm.
So the basics of this is if you get a perfect bell-shaped curve, you have a totally structurally solid site. Doesn't matter whether it's a tooth or an implant or a piece of composite. And the height of that curve shows how overall stability is. So you think in terms of the whole tooth as moving, side to side.
Mhm.
The more movement, the lower the curve. The less movement, stronger the site, the higher the curve, because
Okay.
it's sending energy right back to you. It's not absorbing anything. Now, there's another aspect to it, and that's the shape of the curve. So if it's not a perfect bell-shaped curve, but it's got some little bumps in it, or it's got lots of bumps and lots of valleys, and it extends out in time before all that little micro vibration stops, that's a much more damaged site. And you've
Okay.
got different things that are, moving. And when we were working with the FDA, because we have 3 FDA clearances on this technology, when we were working with them, it was difficult for them to understand that there could be different kinds of cracks other than just cracked tooth syndrome. Certainly, when a tooth is cracked, that's one type of crack. So we
Mhm.
started calling these microgap defects just so that they
Yeah.
would understand that it didn't have to actually be in the tooth structure. For instance, you can have a crack in a filling, and we're going to pick up little vibrations of that. You could have
Okay.
a crown that's sitting on a tooth. And all of us in clinical dentistry know how frustrating it is because there's no way to see through the radiopaque restorations to know that the cement is loosening. But we can pick up, because that's a large crack as it's starting to loosen, and we can pick up those vibrations.
Mhm.
Obviously, we can pick up a crack within the tooth. That's really important. And then the other thing that we are seeing in our studies is that if you've got a widened periodontal ligament because of occlusal trauma or starting infection, then that destruction of the periodontal ligament creates a little space that the root can vibrate. And we do pick that up too. So that's
Interesting.
kind of going from top down. Any of those things can do it. Now, it's not as difficult to sort out where it's coming from really, because you might look in and if there's no crown on a tooth, you don't have a loose crown, obviously, right? And
Mhm.
so,
Yeah.
if you've got a tooth, maybe a silver filling, a large silver filling, then that will be a problem because we know that with time, a silver filling can creep and that can put internal pressures. And oftentimes we all find cracks underneath of those old silver fillings.
Right.
So if you have something that looks like an older silver filling and yet you're
Okay, listeners, we had one of those glitches that you always hear about, but usually I have an editor who does an amazing job. But you know what? We're just going to leave this in because Dr. Sheets and I realized, like, okay, there's things we need to talk about anyways. You just were talking about movement. And when
Mhm.
you said amalgam, it triggered my mind like something I learned from my boss, who I'm so thankful for because he explained everything we did. Even when he didn't need to, he still explained everything. And that's why I learned that amalgam silver fillings are placed in the tooth mechanically, meaning the way it stays in is because of mechanical retention. There's no bonding. It's because you create undercuts so the silver can sit in there. That's a lot of pressure, right? So composites are bonded chemically, so you don't need to have all these overhangs and all this kind of stuff, and you don't have to have little cliffs. And this is I'm very much dumbing it down because that's how he did it for me. I imagine there's a lot more movement in the tooth with the silver filling because there's all these gaps. Like the materials, like you said, constrict over time. There's no chemical bonding, so there's probably like tons of openings in
it's
the tooth and the material.
it's actually ironically the reverse. It's
Really?
funny.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is
So,
great. Let's talk about this. This
yeah,
is great.
composites tend to shrink with
Okay.
time, and so they can break a bond. That's one of the concerns, about
Okay.
opening up margins and everything. But amalgams tend to creep outward. So they tend to put a little slight internal pressure. So
Oh,
that's
okay.
where they think that maybe is the reason, why when you look at a lot of 20, 30, 40-year-old amalgams, that people got when they were children,
Mhm.
that there might have been this little creep that puts internal pressure that then, along with normal forces and everything, encourages cracking. So it's not
Interesting.
unusual to find cracks underneath of these older silver fillings.
Yeah, I just noticed from my assisting days, which is a long time ago, whenever we took out a big silver filling, there was so much mush in there, so much decay, right? And I was just thinking, like, how long has this been going on?
That's the interesting thing that we're seeing is that we know that about 40% of patients that walk out of the dental office thinking that they've been thoroughly evaluated, and certainly we've been trying to do that, they have undiagnosed dental disease,
Mm,
fillings that are breaking down, haven't gotten to the point yet where it's detectable. And of course, we all know that the mouth has an extremely poor warning system. By the time you get pain, you are way down the road of
yeah,
where, the damage has had. This is complicated by the fact that not only is it asymptomatic in the early stages, but that the radiographs have to have 35 to 40% of mineral loss before it even starts picking up the fact that there's a problem there.
Really?
So you've
I
got
never knew that. That's
Yes,
fascinating.
so you have all of these, asymptomatic people, restorations that are getting
Mhm,
worse and not being picked up by the X-rays, and so we take X-rays and we think that, we've got everything, but we don't. And I think
mhm,
that's one of the reasons for the popularity of Pearl or Overjet is that you can see a little bit more in depth, with the help of the AI. But the
mhm.
problem is you're still looking at something that's not being used, and it's still a snapshot in time. And so if you even find that there's a defect, you have to then estimate what you think that defect's gonna do when the patient is using it. Where
Okay.
with this, you don't have to do that. With using quantitative percussion diagnostics, you get to see in real time how that tooth site or implant site is reacting, when to chewing pressures or bruxing pressures. So
Mhm.
if that
Okay.
helps explain it a little bit better.
It does. I just had never really thought about the load piece, like we talked about before the break. Like, I just had never really thought about that, and it would make sense to take a picture under pressure. I mean, like, for the women listening here, like, when you do a mammogram, they've gotta do stuff to you to get that picture the
Mhm.
way they want to, and if you're doing any kind of rehab, they wanna test the range of motion, not just how it looks when you're laying on the table. So, it just makes sense when you explain it. I just had never thought of it that way.
Sure.
But now I'm curious about the composites because I know we're like 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. I don't know what generation composite we're on now.
Lots of
It's
generations. Yeah.
lots of generations, and every generation says this is the bond that's not gonna break, but it does break. I mean, what does facilitate that breakage?
Anything can break. It's basically fatigue failure. We think of fatigue failure for mechanical things, but this is a mechanical issue. It used to
Mhm.
be that patients only kept their teeth till they were about 40 years old, and then they went into dentures, right?
Yeah.
So thank
Yeah.
heavens that's not where we are, but we not only are keeping our teeth longer, but we're
Mhm.
living longer. So it is not unusual. I just had a brand new patient that came in yesterday. She was 98 years old. And
God
she says,
bless.
I want my teeth fixed. And I thought, bless your heart, this is too
Mhm.
cute. And we know that you stay healthier, if you have
Mhm.
your teeth because you're going to digest things better. The enzymes are starting better. It's just a proven fact, that
Yeah.
the more teeth you have, the healthier you're going to be because
Mhm.
the mouth is attached to the rest of the body. It's always a good weather vane on how everything is going. So anyway, getting off of that subject a
I
little
bet
bit.
this is great. We totally geeked out. I love it. Go ahead, sorry.
Okay. The ability to pick things up before they've gotten irreversible, maybe,
Mhm.
or before they've gotten highly damaged is such an advantage, to the patient and to the dentist. So if we can start to realize that, let's say it's a composite and that the bond has broken, or there's a break in the composite itself, or the composite's fine, but the tooth underneath is fractured, and that's putting a fracture that's coming from the bottom up in the restoration. All those things we see happening,
Mhm.
and oftentimes it's under the surface. One of the ads that we use is of a little iceberg, and it shows what's hiding underneath of the surface. Well,
Yeah.
if an iceberg, it's way more underneath than it is what shows above. And that is the same thing with damage. So this is a new way of looking at damage in the teeth. So it's a superpower, if you want to think of it that way in just fun
Yeah.
terms, that all of a sudden has been handed to us in dentistry that
Yeah.
says, okay, beyond just, what we've been able to see, now we can actually use a mechanical test, an engineering based test that's based on physics and math in order to determine the structural health of the tooth. And that allows us to see mechanically what we can't see visually.
So you were talking about the inner motion and you mentioned the periodontal ligament. Would you consider that to not be inner motion? That's not what you mean by that? What do you mean by inner motion versus other motion?
So
Okay.
internal mobility would have to do with fractured in the filling or the crown or the tooth. But the periodontal ligament, this is going to be our third algorithm that we go to the FDA with. We've got studies now and FDA modeling that show that when the periodontal ligament gets damaged, that we see a change in the graph. It extends out longer, and there's some other changes. And we can follow. I'll get that sentence out. We can follow patients that have had endodontic lesions. In fact, we just published a paper this year in the Journal of the American Dental Association, Foundational Science, journal, and it showed the modeling of a woman that had an abscessed tooth. And then as it healed, you could see in the CBCT, it looked like the lesion was gone, but actually it still was ossifying. The periodontal ligament was still healing, and we could
Okay.
see the graft changing and getting closer and closer to that ideal. So we're able to model things happening, going out, and then, as we can see, healing. So that opens up all kinds of other opportunities. We're doing a
Mhm.
study right now on Invisalign patients because with
Oh.
orthodontic movement, you're
Mhm.
purposely damaging the periodontal ligament, right? As
Yeah.
you're moving the tooth through. So it is a petri dish of knowledge for us. And then also, we're looking at patients that clench and grind their teeth a lot. And so you've got these widened ligaments that you can see on the x ray. Those are
Mhm.
damaged PDLs. It's a minor, if you want to say, it's the beginning of orthodontic movement, but you've got this damaged PDL, and we can pick up that. We get much higher numbers on that.
For my non-clinical people listening to this, the PDL, the periodontal ligament, is super fascinating to me. I started speaking in the implant world for implant auxiliaries. And so
Yeah,
let me just do a little, and please pipe in if I get things wrong or if I'm
sure.
slightly off or whatever, please, because it's important for my billers to understand this. Your natural tooth sits in, the PDL surrounds it right at the
Right.
bottom.
It's a
And
big
it's like a
shock
shock
absorber.
absorber. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. That's how it was explained to me. It's a shock absorber. So when you chew, that's normal, whatever. And that's why, like, if you have somebody that gets punched in the mouth and their tooth is loose, it can tighten back up because it will
Mhm.
heal, right? But when you have an implant, there is no periodontal ligament to act as a shock
Right,
absorber anymore because it's just not there.
right.
And that's why your implant dentist, the people placing the implants, the angle has to be correct, but the restoration has to be correct because the load there, this is where math comes in, the physics, like you were talking about.
Yeah,
If the load is off by a little bit, you are like angular, like you're going to introduce probably even more load than was on the natural tooth. And then that's going to damage the bone. Then the bone doesn't like it. Then the bone shrinks away. Then you have a failed implant. And my non-clinical people, the reason why this is important is ask your doctor to show you if there's any thickening of a periodontal ligament. If he or she comes across a radiograph that shows that, it's really important for you to see what that looks like because that might help you in some of your appeals when you write it up and your doctor will be like, oh my gosh, look at you bringing in the PDL,
yeah,
that kind of thing. But it's super important for us to understand why implants are needed and why they fail because I started out when oh my gosh. I remember listening to Carl Misch and thinking, "Oh, this guy, like, I'm never gonna understand anything he says." Like, he just spoke at such a high level, and it was way long ago, and I remember him saying, like, "It's the best method for replacing natural teeth," but then other educators I heard say, "Implants are better than natural teeth," and I thought,
yeah,
"That's absurd," right? So you will
yeah,
hear lots of claims, people, on,
right.
"Let's not save this tooth, let's just put an implant in." It's like, "Wait a second here," right? But as far as motion goes,
Yeah.
did I miss
Yeah,
anything with
yeah,
the
well,
PDL?
pretty much accurate. There's a little
Okay.
bit of a difference, and that is that,
Please,
um,
yeah.
yeah, implants can be placed. In fact, sometimes they'll purposely place them at an angle in order
Okay.
to expand out the length of what you're able to create for the patient that doesn't have a lot of bone.
Okay.
However, there's no question that you're talking about loading forces now that are on an angle. So, you have to be careful and it has to really be biomechanically set up accurately. So, if someone just places an implant in and they're not really coordinating in with what's going to happen restoratively, you can really get into some trouble because at the end of the day, we're not putting a screw in wood. We're putting a titanium screw into bone, which is a biological material which
Mhm.
can get overload and it can break down and it could react to bacteria. So that's what periimplantitis is all about, probably a combination of both. You've got anaerobic bacteria that are creating chaos down in that
Mhm.
bone interface, and you've got, overloading. Those are really important things. But it gets even more interesting when you're putting implants in with natural teeth. So now all of a sudden you might have an implant with no periodontal ligament opposing a tooth that has a periodontal ligament, and you
Okay.
can really overload that tooth. So when we look at our data and we've got implants that are mixed in, we always look at what's happening above and on the side,
Mhm.
particularly in a clincher bruxer, because that's
Okay.
where you can start getting into trouble because the implant, like you pointed out, doesn't have a shock absorber. So it just, when you impact it, it just boom, shoots it back up like a steel post being hit by a steel hammer in cement.
Mm.
But when
Mhm.
you've got a tooth with the periodontal ligament, it's gonna absorb it, and that's so ironic you brought that up because that's what got me into all of this. I was
Really?
treating a patient, and I'll had a request of the periodontist, to put implants in to support this is, like, many years ago, just help support a bridge, and so I would go in and put these custom milled little gold crowns,
Mhm.
on the teeth and the implants so that everything was parallel, and then you'd make a beautiful bridge that sat over it, and you'd have a combined implant and tooth support. Worldwide, there was an incidence where the natural tooth associated with the implant would start moving into the bone or up into the bone. It was called
Mm.
intrusion, tooth intrusion. And they
Okay.
thought that it was irreversible and it was a mystery as to why it happened. And there were all kinds of papers written on this. We had never run into this in our office, and I probably got a little too smug, just thinking it was because we had our own laboratory and we really watched our occlusion and, that we were a little protected. And I think we were somewhat protected because we were doing quite a lot of work, as you know.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I get a call from the periodontist and says, "Dr. Sheets, you've got an open margin on one of these crowns." And I knew the woman, I knew how she was put together, and I thought,
Yeah.
I don't think so. I mean, I didn't mean that egotistically, but I thought, "Oh, there's no way. I mean, I
Right,
know how
right.
this was machined and put together and everything was sealed off." So I said, "Well, have the patient come over and let me take a look." And I thought I'd see what this hygienist, had found.
Yeah.
I looked in her mouth and my mouth dropped open. There was an implant, in the bridge, and the back molar had rotated into the bone 5 millimeters. And you could see the 5 millimeter opening between the gold margin on the crown and the margin on the bridge.
5
5 millimeters.
millimeters is a lot.
Oh, it's huge. And it
Wow.
followed kind of the eruption pattern of the molar when it came out as the patient was a child. So I thought, "Oh my gosh, we've got one of those." And 10 days later, another woman walks in with an upper 10-unit splint that had a couple implants placed for
Oh,
additional strength,
wow.
and the little lateral next to it had moved up 4 millimeters. And I thought, "What are we gonna do? I can't tell this person that has just spent all this money to get a full mouth reconstruction,
Mm.
we don't know why that's happening. It's a mystery and it's
Yeah.
irreversible." I just thought, "I can't do that," So
Wow.
I just started playing around with different things that you do if it was all natural teeth while I was trying to figure out what was going on, and I noticed that the tooth was moving back into position. And I had taken the bridge off and just put it in because it was a large superstructure, put it in with Vaseline. What I was doing without knowing it was I was adding shock absorption. And so it was compensating for the mismatch between the implant shock absorption and the tooth shock absorption,
Oh,
and the tooth was
fascinating.
starting to move back. That was kind of a breakthrough because I didn't really know why. And then all of a sudden one day I thought, this is like orthodontic movement. This is regular orthodontic movement I'm seeing. I just can't
Mhm.
see that there's something pushing on it. So what is it that's pushing on it? And that's when I decided it's got to be the mechanical stress energy that's coming off of this mismatch. I was trying to show the man that I was practicing with at the time, who'd been like my mentor. And I was going, "Look, this is reversing." And if he'd said, oh, yeah, that's really interesting," I probably would have just let it die, but he
Mhm.
didn't. He always kind of probed me to go further and further, and so
I
I
love
he
that.
said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah," and I was so angry. I took 2 X-rays, one with the thing intruded and one with the thing not intruded, and I said, "Look, the difference. It's obvious." And so he goes, "Well, if you think you have something, you should just get yourself over to the UCI School of Engineering and see if anybody believes you." I said, "Fine." So I walked out of the office, pretty hot. I walk in and my husband, who's not in dentistry or medicine at all, he's in finance, and he says,
Mhm.
"I have to go to the UCI School of Engineering tonight and meet the dean. You don't wanna go, do you?" And I said, "I'll be in the car in 5 minutes, I'll explain on the way." And that's what started all of this.
Things happen for a reason, but I'm just
Absolutely.
imagining when you got these cases, you were like, "Is there a full moon? Like, what is going on?" You must have thought,
Exactly.
like, "What like, how many"
What's
and you
happening?
probably were thinking, "How many more are gonna walk through the door
That
now?"
is exactly what I was thinking. And so, anyway, the dean, thank heavens, got really interested and intrigued, and he said, "I have someone I want you to talk with," and that was Jim Earthman. So he called me, and he came over, and I pulled out 2 boxes of documentation that I had on both of these patients, with photos, study casts, all kinds of
Mhm.
stuff. And he said, "Wow, this is a treasure trove of data." So he dove into it, and a couple hours later, he said, "I think what you're saying makes perfect sense from an engineering standpoint. Let's write a paper." And so we did, and we submitted it to JPD. They thought it was really timely and important. They fast-tracked it, and it was out in print in 3 months, which
Wow,
is
wow.
unheard of.
Yeah,
So
wow.
then Jim came back to me and he said, "We've done something really bad." And I said, "Oh, what's that?" And he said, "Well,
Uh-oh.
we put out a hypothesis and I have no way to prove it. We need to prove this." So he was looking for something that could measure this differential in shock absorption and couldn't find anything on the marketplace, and invented the original research version of this, which was called the periometer. And we thought it was just, a science project. And it wasn't until we kept finding more and more things that it could happen. The way we found out that we could pick up cracks in teeth was the students were, testing bridges. He'd have them, I'd make things here at the office in our laboratory. We'd send them. They would do all this testing and everything. And all of a sudden, we always got a bell-shaped curve, always, because everything was made perfect. And then one
Mm,
day, one of them was perfect and one of them had a blip in it. And when
interesting.
they started researching to try and find out was there a loose wire, what was going on, they realized that one of the students had dropped the ceramic bridge on the cement floor and said, "Did I ruin everything? I'm so sorry." And Dr. Earthman looks at it and goes, "No, I don't think so. Thanks." And so called me and said, "We can pick up cracks." And it wasn't until I started using teeth as the contralateral to our implants, we
Mhm.
realized that all these teeth had all these different shaped grafts. And I knew we were sitting on something really important and we needed to figure out what it was. And that started our crack research.
And so InnerView came from
That's right,
that,
came out
right?
of all of that. We realized we needed something clinical, and that's when I brought in a close friend, Robert Heyman, who had started a company called Discus Dental, knew how to do all of this, and he came in, saw it, and said, "I think this is breakthrough technology,
Okay.
but we have to make a company." And so we started building all of the research papers, submitting everything, redesigning to get something that was easy to use, wireless, Bluetooth, with software that was easy to work with and that documented what we were finding. And as we did it and kept adding on more and more bright, intelligent PhD people, it's kept getting better and better and better, and we discovered that we could do more and more things. And so it's been a really interesting journey into this field of finding what the capabilities were of a whole new mechanism of testing teeth and implants. So that's kind of the backstory.
Let's translate this then to getting paid by a patient, totally separate. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, you have to have the documentation, though, because of state board and record keeping, all that. I mean, that's always the standard of care. But when it comes to insurance, I'm thinking, I've got a tooth that my doctor wants to restore. You've used the interview. Am I looking at, is there enough data where I can say this matches up with the other benchmarks, or is it better to have, like 6 months ago, what did the tooth look like? Or today? I mean, I'm sure you have enough studies that show,
We can
like,
do
if it's
both.
at this, okay, okay,
We know and have two distinct metrics, scales for damage and when you need to really pay attention. So, for
okay.
instance, look at overall mobility. We know whether it's a tooth or an implant, if you're below 58, you're in solid bone. And that's really good. Once you get up above, if the scale goes from 0 to 100, we know
Okay.
with implants, if you get into the higher levels, where you're into 78 and above, those are weak implants. Now, they might still be in
Mhm.
the mouth, they might be serviceable, but you don't want to probably use that as a bridge abutment. It might satisfy as a lateral single implant, but if you were using it as a bridge abutment, you probably want to bring in some additional help for that. On the other hand, if you've got an implant and you're scoring really high, you might have a failure, or it's certainly an ailing implant. So that lets that the kind of the general health because of this overall mobility. Everybody knows that implants shouldn't move, right?
Right,
And
yeah.
we're picking it up at the early stages when oftentimes you can go in and unload it and then get an improvement in it. Or even I've found patients that are osteoporotic. And if we would kind of supplement, we can follow and see maybe it's helpful, maybe it's not. But you never had a way of knowing before. Now, automatically, every time a patient is tested, it not only gives you that immediate, rapid information, it automatically goes into a trend line study so that you can see without any effort on your part all the comparison of it. You don't have to hold up different x-rays and try and look, or different perio
Mhm.
probings and try and look. With this, we automatically create that trend line history for every tooth and implant in the patient's mouth that's tested. So that's why it's so important. So to answer your question
Yeah.
specifically, if the dentist thinks that, you should have some work done based upon just that one rapid identification, if you're up, we know above 66 on the internal mobility, you
Mhm.
have statistically a 95% confidence level that you have at least one microgap defect in that site. Once you're up to 80, and that's considered beyond a reasonable doubt for statisticians.
Okay.
Once you're at 81 and above, and this can go up as high as it'll go. So, I mean, I've had readings that are almost to 200. And
Oh,
we
wow.
know over 40, you're starting to get, more significant reading. But when
Okay.
you start getting up that level, you know that there's something. It's not, is there something? There is something that's going on. And if
Mhm.
you look at it and you can't see visually, or you can't probe, and you don't have anything on your 2D x-rays, that might be a time then when you would say, well, I want to get a CBCT. I want to look
Okay.
at this in more detail. And so we give you kind of a checklist, for the clinician that's built in now to the software. And
Mhm.
if they're just not sure what to do with that information, you can pull that up and it will say, check the occlusion, or, look in more
Oh,
depth
that's
at the
great.
x-ray. And so that helps guide them until they get their own feet under them, so to speak, to where they
Mhm.
start to have an intuitive way of interpreting this.
And as a treatment coordinator in my past life, I really enjoyed that because I felt like patients could understand between he and I.
Yeah,
They understood what we were trying to get across because it was really important for us and important for dentistry in general to not throw a whole bunch of terms at the patient so they can
right.
understand. And because when they buy into the treatment that they actually need, then there's not too much of, well, I don't know why I did this. You told me I had to do it. Like you just don't get that, right? And
No.
and so I'm thinking, because I saw the chart and we'll have it, if you're watching YouTube, we'll have it in the background. The chart that is shown, and is there a patient-facing chart that can be generated, or is it one chart right now for
No,
both?
no, it's, everything's digital, so, you can
Okay.
send it to them or you can print it out for them, and I found that with patients and, you're talking about treatment coordination, for me, this becomes so easy. I mean, I put this up, when I'm doing my examination. I look at that first before I look at the x-rays or before I look in the mouth, because once I look at the x-rays or look in the mouth, I'm prejudiced. With all the years of experience and everything, if you look in and you see a cracked, cusp off, you immediately start thinking, oh, should I do a composite, an onlay, a crown, and
Yeah,
whatever
yeah.
your personal philosophy is, you start treatment planning, right? And you miss all these other things that are going on. Yeah, that one's cracked. And oh, by the way, there's crowns on the other side where she's already cracked two more teeth. And we've got these old alloys that look like they're small, been there
Mhm.
forever. But when you look at the readings, they're sky high in their
Oh,
readings.
wow.
They're 110 and so
Mm,
immediately you start looking at things a little differently and diagnosing a little bit more comprehensively.
I love that. Okay, it sounds to me, I mean, this is kinda like when scanning came out. I thought, "Okay, well, I hear all these doctors now, they're scanning as a baseline, like, now this is just part of their comprehensive evaluation," and then I hear doctors like, "That's a lot of time and all." I'm thinking, you know what? It just becomes what it is. Like, I'm sure at some point way back in the day when your father and I came from a legacy office, when my
Yeah.
boss's father, they probably didn't take FMXs. They were like, "I'll just whatever. We'll just take a line." Like, right? Like, it
Yeah.
just becomes standard of care. And if you're saying it's like 2 to 3 minutes to do a scan of the mouth, like, why wouldn't you? Like, to me, it just
Yeah.
feels like such a good adjunct to have, and you're gonna give me something that's gonna help me close your cases, like, crying out loud, I'm gonna make your
Yeah.
money back right away. Like, I will make your money back,
Yes.
you
Oh,
know?
absolutely. And if I have a patient, that's the spouse is concerned, about the cost, I mean, that's totally understandable. It's an
Mhm.
investment, particularly when you get into really complex care. I find that when I bring them back, I start again, with that, and they see the difference between a tooth that looks really healthy and one that doesn't. And
Yeah,
so it really helps give them a reference in which to make a judgment of whether they should go ahead, with this work or not. So you don't have to sell anything. All you're doing is educating, and you're just
yeah.
showing them the data in an easy way for them to kind of see it. And that's really critically important. I'm glad you brought that up because I find that that's so helpful to me every single day.
Well, and I mean, I learned very early on, patients are visual, but the visual stuff we were giving them back in the day was not helpful because x-rays are just shades of gray. Then when things became colorful, our perio chart became colorful, right?
Yeah.
And now with the AI imaging, it's so much easier to present treatment now than ever before. And so
Yeah.
the question always becomes, and I know we were going to touch on this, is, well, does it help get your insurance claims paid? And I'm thinking it could help. I'm not going to promise. I'm sure you're not going to promise. But
No.
would it help the consultant reviewer see the case quicker? Sure. But what I think it does is, even if they deny the claim, if they say, no, it doesn't matter, we're just not going to
Yeah.
allow benefits, but your patient sees it. And to
Yeah.
me, that's the most important thing is the patient will be like, well, it's not that my doctor is, because sometimes the language does say, we don't believe this treatment is necessary.
Sure. Sure.
And sometimes it doesn't, but sometimes it does. And the patients take their cues from that. Now I'm going to have a patient that's going to say, oh, no, this is necessary. Why are they not
Yeah.
benefiting for it?
Right.
That's how we change the conversation, right? I
Yes.
just feel like the insurance conversation is important, but the case acceptance, the patient understanding is like miles more important than
Yes,
that.
I would agree with you. Yeah, there's many, many things that aren't covered by insurance today, the dental insurance.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
you've got a maximum of about $1,500
Hmm.
for every patient. That was what the maximum was when I graduated from dental school, and the price of a crown was much different then. I think everybody knows, that this kind of stayed steady, even though
Hmm.
the costs of providing things. So there's all kinds of things that really aren't covered. But this
Yeah.
does have two clear, like you've pointed out, two clear codes that can be used.
Hmm.
And we actually sat down with 3 people at the ADA that had written the codes and everything, and to go over this and understand if, in fact, we were really covered because it sounded like it. And they said, "Yeah, there's nothing else you need to do. You are completely covered under these 2 codes." So that was
Perfect.
extremely helpful.
Yeah, perfect. Because if there's anything that billers dislike, it's a 999 code. So any of these new technologies coming out, when we hear, oh, we have to bill a 999, we immediately go, oh,
Yeah.
so, and there's a part of us that still want to use it, but I know there's a lot of billers that are like, man, this just made my life harder. You don't have that with this, which is great. I did have a question though, because I know a lot of people are doing sleep medicine. The appliances they have to wear, how does that affect movement in the
What a
mouth? You're studying that, I'm sure.
What a perceptive question. Yes, because particularly amongst patients where you're moving that mandible forward quite significantly. And if they're
Mhm.
heavy clincher bruxers, I mean, they can put heavy, heavy forces on that. And we've actually seen them move teeth and open up contacts significantly and even change occlusion. And that's well
Oh,
documented now. And
oh.
so we can pick that up. Like I said, this goes back to orthodontic movement, damaged periodontal ligament. And so we're gonna
Mhm.
get higher readings on those teeth that are going through that process. If you're just kind of aware of that and you're
Yeah.
looking for those problems, I think that that would be very helpful.
That's what I'm thinking, like, as a sleep dentist, if I were a sleep dentist, I would want to have this tool because as you're seeing that person over time, you don't wanna be the one responsible for that shift in occlusion. Because now the
Yeah.
general dentist might be like, "What are you doing here to my patient?" And then
Yeah,
that affects the referral conversation
sure.
too. So it's
Yeah,
all interrelated. Like, I would love to be able to measure stuff like that. I really just
and
had never thought of not being able to measure the movement. I really before this, I just hadn't thought of it, doctor. So
yeah,
this is, like, wild to me. I love it. I
good.
love it.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
we get a lot of excitement when people realize that they maybe have another tool now that they can utilize.
Yeah, if
So
there's anything I know about dentists, y'all love your tools. So, I mean, a new tool is
yes,
like a
we
new
do.
toy,
Yeah,
right? And
exactly.
you've done a lot of work with microscopes too, just real quick, because I know we're getting to the, top here, but microscopes, you've done a lot of work with microscopes, and I can tell you from talking to doctors who utilize it and doctors who are starting to utilize it, like, they love their microscope. Like, you
Yeah.
cannot get them to stop using it once they start. Was that your experience with it too? Just now you want it with everything or
Oh, absolutely. And when I knew that I was kind of over the edge on this thing was one day we had a sedated patient in the room and all of a sudden the light went out in the microscope. The lights never go out in the microscope. They're like Mack trucks, they're just you invest in them and they just are there every day for you from that point on. And all of a sudden I didn't have the microscope to use and I was in a panic because I had this full arch I needed to prep and I knew that
oh,
I wasn't going to have my microscope. And so we were gonna move the patient to another room to utilize another microscope. And I thought, wow, I used to do full mouth rehabs all the time with no microscope. Why all of a sudden is this such a big difference? And I realized then that it just provided so much more, not only light, but magnification in areas that you just can't typically see when you're doing
Mhm.
your dentistry. You're oftentimes either with poor lighting or, with just inaccessibility. And to realize that all of a sudden that was removed, and the fact that I'm sitting upright looking out at infinity, so it's not putting strain on my head and neck and
Mhm.
shoulders, where,
Mhm.
you just go home aching at night, and this
Yeah.
makes a huge difference. So, like
It's
we were talking before, I think it's one of the reasons that I've been able to have such longevity with clinical dentistry, because I'm
Mhm.
still, as we talked about, practicing 40 hours a week.
40
And
hours a week doing huge cases, and I remember one doctor telling me he wished he had never, I mean, he didn't really mean it, but he's like, "I
yeah.
wish I had never gotten this microscope because it," like, he can't go back to
Oh,
doing
no.
things the old way, and
Right.
he's like, "So now when I look at other cases," he has an associate that doesn't use a microscope, he's like, "I feel like I'm silently judging every time," and I'm like, You probably are, you are, look at you, you are."
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but he
Yeah.
said he said, "I wish I hadn't known," and then, of course, he's joking, but I kinda get that, and it sounds like you had the same experience on that, so that's
Yeah,
interesting.
absolutely. When they wanted us to look at, we had 2 companies that were asking us simultaneously to look at the utilization of this in restorative dentistry, and I thought that it probably wouldn't work because there's a lot that we're doing moving all over the mouth, but I had finished a prep, and I thought it looked pretty nice, and I pulled the microscope over to just look at it, and I was just amazed at how much detail I could see, and I thought, "Oh, yeah, there's this little blip right here." So, of course,
Wow.
obsessive compulsive that I am, I went in to kind of smooth that, and then it became fun, and I dinked around a few more times, and then I took the microscope and put it away, and I looked at the prep, and I thought, "This is the best work I've ever done." And that
Oh,
was
that's
it.
awesome.
That was
That's
it. I
awesome.
was hooked. And, my partner, Dr. Justine Paquette, was working, around that same time period because we were both looking at the same time, and she said, "Oh, you've gotta come look at this. You've gotta come look." So she, I ran over to her operatory. It was a 5-unit gold and porcelain bridge that had been done by Dr. Reeder years earlier, and there was decay that was coming in on the distal furca of number 15. That was the only thing that was wrong with the bridge. And so she had the patient back, she had the mirror there, we had the microscope, we had lighting, and she could go in and see that and clean out that decay in that furca, place a nice little composite, well-sealed, polished restoration, which could have never, ever been done, controlling the fluids and everything. It would have never happened otherwise. We would have had to replace the whole bridge. And, just experiences like that over and over, just showed us that we'd had to do it. That's what I think was so exciting to me about when I started using InnerView, is because I'd been looking at these cracks and fractures in magnified form for so long, and to be able to pick them up before I actually was going in and restoring was amazing, to just see over and over that, because our first studies were all blinded. And so we would have
Okay.
one team test, with the, QPD, and then I would go in because we were gonna do work on these patients anyway, and then, as I would take out these old restorations, I would document in video as well as in written documentation, so no one could say, "Well, how do we really know it was there?" Well, we've got the video,
Love
belt
it.
and suspenders, right? So,
Mhm.
anyway, we had, just extremely high sensitivity specificities. We're always in the high 90s on this, so anyway, it's an amazing technology that we're just excited to share with everybody.
If you're a dental biller, you already know how frustrating it is to find clear answers. You search on Google or Facebook, but instead of solutions, you get vague or incorrect information. And finding people who truly understand dental billing and can actually help, it's even harder. That's exactly why I created Dental Revenue Network. Dental Revenue Network is one of the fastest growing communities for dental billers, a place where you can connect with the best and brightest professionals in the field. Post your problem. Fellow billers and experts will help you out. The benefit is that you can ask specific questions and receive specific answers that can actually help resolve your problem. We also provide updated resources to make dental billing easier. On top of that, DRN hosts monthly meetings and events where members can connect, learn, and grow their professional network. Did you miss a meeting? No problem. Every meeting is recorded and available on the DRN recordings page, so you can catch up anytime. Business owner members have an additional meeting every month to focus on growth, marketing, and compliance matters. Everything you need to confidently manage dental insurance and RCM is all in one place. Go to dentalrevenuenetwork.com and be a part of our growing community today. I'm telling you, I feel like in dentistry, you've seen it. We're sort of similar in age. You aged very gracefully, I must say. I know your age and you look great for your age. But what I'm saying here is
Oh,
our
yes,
careers have seen such exciting, like right now, the new people coming into dentistry, they're used to digital, they're used to AI and all that.
yeah,
Like we've seen all this stuff come through. So I feel like we get way more excited about stuff than some of the
yeah,
younger doctors because the doctors are like, oh, well, everything's Superman capable. Like,
yeah,
and I'm like, I
ho
remember
hum.
dip tanks. Yeah, like now we're away from dip tanks to now AI imaging. Like we've come
Yeah,
a long way. So it's super exciting to still be wowed by technology. I do
sure.
hope our listeners, I mean, you've seen, if you were watching on YouTube, you've seen it in the background, but click the link. I'll have the link to Parametric and the InnerView product. And, maybe test it for yourself, get in touch, do a demo. I'm excited about it. They'll go to the Parametric site,
Yeah.
but if they were interested in you as a speaker, or, I mean, can they just go through Parametrics? How do they reach you, doctor?
They can go through Parametrics, and then also my private email is cgsheets at ncofi.org, which is our nonprofit teaching and research center.
Perfect. Perfect. And we'll make sure that's in the show notes as well.
Okay, great.
I hope that listeners, I know we talk about RCM a lot. I hope you geeked out clinically like I did today. Such a nice welcome change sometimes. But very much thank you for your insight on this. It was really a lot of fun. I hope people use this also because the state of documentation in dentistry needs all the help that it can get. And
Yeah.
this is just to me like so evident that it would be helpful. I really appreciate it, doctor.
Yeah, thank you. This has really been fun. I appreciate your time.
And dear listeners, as always, I so appreciate that you spend your time with me.